I'm the co-chair of Boston Harbor Now's Policy and Planning Committee, and this morning I'll be the host of this forum. Boston Harbor Now, as you probably know, convenes these meetings to enable members of the public to learn more about projects, both public and private projects happening around the waterfront. If this is your first time at one of these forums, welcome. And if you've joined us before, welcome back. A word about Boston Harbor Now. We're a nonprofit focused on ensuring that the waterfront and the harbor islands are increasingly prepared for the coastal impacts of climate change. And as we've been focused for a long time on providing welcoming and inclusive open space and indoor uses to people from all over Boston. And we call this concept Harbor Walk 2.0. Our work spans a wide range of issues, from commenting on waterfront development projects to planning for future ferry service to bringing underserved communities out to experience the harbor islands. Boston Harbor Now believes very strongly that the waterfront belongs to all of us, and that by bringing together interactive conversations like this one, we can help ensure that projects are both inclusive and resilient. So by way of introduction to our speakers, over the last several years, the Boston Planning and Development Agency has been working on a master plan update for the Ray Flynn Marine Park, what those of us who are old enough knew as the Boston Marine Industrial Park, that was officially released last year. The plan calls for a mix of lab space within the industrial area that can complement existing uses, from fish processing to the dry dock to the cruise port. 310 Northern Avenue demonstrates how this complex mix of uses can come together in the district. Today, we're joined by Danielle Blake of Marcus Partners, John Sullivan of SGA, and Heather Walters of Thornton Tomasetti, who are going to walk us through the project. After their presentation, we'll open up the conversation for everyone in attendance. And Danielle, with that, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, great. Can you guys hear me okay? All right. John Sullivan's going to share his screen, and I'm going to just apologize in advance. My camera is on my laptop and then the screen's up above, so my eyes are going to kind of shift around a little bit. And for some reason, I can't see you all. But
I spotlighted you, so you're the.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, as long as you guys are there and you can hear me. Okay. So, so thank you, Al. Appreciate the intro. Thank you, Alice, and thank you for all your time today. Really appreciate it. My name is Danielle Blake, and I work for Marcus Partners. We're the proponent for the 310 Northern Avenue project. John Sullivan is joining me here today. He is a principal at SGA and the project's lead architect. And Heather Walters is also here. Heather is from Thornton Tomasetti and is our project sustainability consultant. John, do you mind going to the next slide, please? So we prepared a series of slides to provide an overview of the project and provide you with some insights into our planning process. You know, we are really excited about the innovation that's happening in the Marine Park and this opportunity to mix the traditional R&D uses with the contemporary life science R&D use, as Al suggested. But we also know that there are concerns about how mixing these industrial uses is going to work. And that's particularly true with respect to traffic impacts. And we've been spending a lot of time in the Marine Park, meeting with the various stakeholders, actually spending time walking around in the park, understanding how the park works. Our team has been committed and will continue to be committed to working with the state, the city, the Marine Park tenants to plan this project so it causes no adverse impact to our neighbors. We have neighbors here who have been successfully operating in this park for years, and it's really important for us to be good neighbors. I think that, or we think that we've put a project proposal forward that is pretty thoughtful in how it addresses the competing interests of the park, because there are a lot of interests out here. You know, we're dealing with truck traffic concerns. We want to preserve the seafood industry. We, you know, have height limitations because of the FAA. We have all sorts of competing interests that I think you'll see our plan addresses. So let's start out with a context. John, if you don't mind going to the next slide. please. So again, talking about the Ray Flynn Marine Park, which is outlined in a black dash line on this plan. Our site is parcel X in the Marine Park. So it's parcel X in the master plan update, table 7. And that's what's outlined or highlighted here in gold. John, if you can just go to the next slide, we'll zoom in a little bit closer so that everyone can appreciate the site's context. So parcel X outlined here in red. We are located immediately to the east of Harpoon Brewery and John Nagel Seafood. So that's to the left of us on the other side of Seafood Way. We have the Innovation Square building on the other side of unnamed access road to the east, to the right, which was recently completed. Vertex Pharmaceuticals is in that front building on Northern Avenue. And then you have the dry dock on the other side of that. You have the city managed garage just to the south of us on the other side of Northern Avenue. And then you have the Massport Marine Terminal to the north on the other side of Fid Kennedy Avenue. So this site, parcel X, is actually owned by the city of Boston, like a lot of the parcels out here. It's currently ground leased to the new Boston Seafood Center, which consists of several seafood condo spaces. And our involvement dates back actually to 2019. We responded to a request for proposal that the new Boston Seafood Center had put out to developers that wanting a developer to acquire their existing parcel X ground lease from the city of Boston. We entered into an agreement with the new Boston Seafood Center shortly after that, with the goal to redevelop it into life science, consistent with the master plan update. And since then, we've been working collaboratively with the BPDA, the EDIC, the various city departments, for those of you who don't know, and various state and park stakeholders to plan the project and to advance project entitlements. John, do you mind? We're going to click through a series of existing conditions photos here just to kind of virtually do a site walk. So these are low density buildings that exist out there today. This is the new Boston Seafood Center. 2 existing buildings, primarily for seafood processing and distribution. They date back to the 1990s. And so while they're not all that old, they are showing their age and they have limitations that are essentially cost prohibitive for the sellers to upgrade, which is one of the drivers for this project. John, if you just keep going slowly, we're just going to see that, you know, you can really appreciate the site from these photos. It's surrounded by a sea of pavement. Really to provide the flexibility that these tractor trailers that support the companies that exist on site today, as well as our neighbors at Harpoon Brewery, John Nagel, and throughout the neighborhood have needed to move the tractor trailers, you know, safely and freely throughout the park. Let's keep going. There's lots of pavement out here. You see, we've got flush sidewalks, really no pervious surfaces. No real efforts for safe circulation or, you know, public enjoyment, truly an industrial site. Lots of parking, lots of tractor trailer parking. So just kind of orient you here before we jump into the proposed project. I think there's a couple of more. So you can see that in relationship to the MMT beyond. Keep going here. This is unnamed access road that you're looking at. You've got like a key plan in the upper right hand corner, and then this is Northern Avenue. So if you go to the next slide here, our proposal is to redevelop parcel X into life science, as Al suggested, entirely consistent with the master plan update, which I think you'll all learn from this conversation. And as Al said, going back to the spirit of the master plan update, the city, as the park's landowner, identified a decline in over-the-dock industries and the need to invest in the park's water-dependent infrastructure. And given that, coupled with the fact that there's a strong demand for general industrial space that is complementary to the existing uses in the park, they saw an opportunity to bring different industrial uses to the park, create this relief valve for demand, but also provide the opportunity to provide financial support for infrastructure improvements that are needed in this area. And so our project is to develop 2 life science buildings totaling 742,000 square feet. We refer to them as 310 Northern and 5 Fid Kennedy. You'll see them in our site plan and in our renderings, which we'll share shortly here. For those of you who are familiar with the master plan update and this site in particular, you may know that we are not required to provide any public accommodation under Chapter 91 because of the Marine Industrial Park and the designated port area. But we do feel it's the right thing to do for the Marine Park tenants. So we are doing a couple of things. We're proposing a small amount of non-destination retail at the ground floor. We've talked to, like I said, many of the park stakeholders. A lot of people in the park like the idea of having, again, non-destination retail to support their needs, whether it's optionality for getting lunch or grabbing a coffee, or maybe it's sundries. Don't know what the retail strategy is yet, but something that's going to be a convenience to the park. Also, we are including a significant public realm here on the site. We have over 50,000 square feet of public space where people can, socialize, connect with nature, have a mental respite, grab a bite to eat. But essentially, it's important to create these protected urban park spaces so that people feel they can enjoy the space, but then they feel protected from the truck traffic that's happening on the nearby streets. We're also not required under Table 7 to provide a marine industrial use on the site. And while our program doesn't include marine industrial use specifically, what you'll see in our site plan is we've reserved a significant portion of our site plan to accommodate our abutters marine industrial trucks. And you'll appreciate that more on the following slides. John, why don't we go to the next slide, please? Real quick, before I get into this slide, I should just note from a planning and entitlement perspective, we have completed our Article 80 permitting with the City of Boston. We have received our MIPA certificate for the project specific. We submitted our project commencement notice under the special review procedure of the master plan update. We got that approved in, I think, January. And we are about to start the Chapter 91 review. Actually, the city's starting it with their master plan update, and then our project as a variable of that update will go through its project-specific Chapter 91 process. So that is still outstanding, just to kind of keep that in mind. So on this slide, I want to share just a few things. One is, our agreement with the New Boston Seafood Center is to develop and fund a significant portion of a new seafood facility on the Massport Marine Terminal, which we refer to as the relocation facility. So the Massport Marine Terminal is the area highlighted in blue. You see the relocation facility there. There's a little rendering of what we have approved by the city and the state in the upper right-hand corner. And this is really for the sellers who want to stay and grow their business in the marine park. This new facility provides them the opportunity to do that in a modern facility that they wouldn't otherwise be able to afford, and under extended ground lease terms. I think their current ground lease expires in 34 years, and this new ground lease is a minimum 50 years, and we're working towards a longer duration there. The other thing to note on this slide is, circulation around the site. So for those of you who've been tracking the master plan update and some of the comments to it, Fid Kennedy is thought of as a sacred truck route, right? So everything to the north on the Massport Marine Terminal is thought of as, marine industrial use. And everything to the south is thought of as these mixed industrial uses. And so we're really being thoughtful about how approaching the site and the arrival experience, and making sure we're really preserving sacred truck routes, which we're illustrating here in purple. Northern Avenue to the south, as I think many of you may know, the city is in the process of finalizing upgrades to that street to better accommodate pedestrians and bikes, and really have more of a mixed thoroughfare there. So our challenge is making sure that we try to honor all of that planning in terms of providing for pedestrians, providing for bikes, but also preserving trucks and making sure that we create some safe separation to the extent we can within our limits to do so. Also, just worth mentioning while we're on here, For those of you who don't know us, we do have some experience working in the park. We're currently developing our Foundry at Dry Dock project, which is on parcels O and P, just north of the dry dock, and that is for Ginkgo Bioworks. That project is currently under construction and anticipated to deliver in 2024. Let's go to the next slide, please. All right, so this is looking at the existing site top down. I thought this would be good just so you could understand what we're dealing with in terms of our abutters loading program. So you can see at Harpoon Brewery and John Nagel, they have significant back of house operations abutting our site. And if you can imagine, and this aerial doesn't fully show it, but if you have tractor trailers stacked up all along that length of the building, if you can imagine, they're going to need a lot of space to be able to maneuver and do their sweeping motions. And so when we started to meet with them and think about how we could develop a site plan that works for a life science use, but also doesn't cause any adverse impact to them, we collaborated with them on a series of truck movement studies. So if you can go to the next slide. We literally met with them over months and said, what are all the different scenarios that you have today? And what are the scenarios you think you'll have in the future, right? Because we want to make sure whatever we build here accommodates their business plan looking forward. And so we did a series of truck movement studies, both in software, and we actually went out on the site. We had surveyors mark the truck maneuvers. We hired tractor trailer drivers to do the movements. And we've sited our building to accommodate these trucks. So if you can see, we've got notches in the ground floor. John, I don't know if you can highlight that, but it's a significant area on the property site, our side of the property line, to accommodate their trucks. So they're going to be able to encroach on the property line 50+ feet to continue with their operations with no adverse impact. And I think, they're very appreciative of that. We've been building trust with them, and we're pretty excited about kind of the plan that we have here today and how it translates into the site plan and the arrival experience to the buildings. So John, I'm going to actually pause here and let you talk a little bit about that following on the next slide.
Thanks, Danielle. And thank you, everyone. Excited to be here to present the project. Kind of picking up where Danielle left off, we wanted to share our site plan, our proposed site plan for the project. And I think it's important to kind of highlight that all of the streets that kind of, surround the site present a different opportunity and have different, different goals. So, as Danielle mentioned, Seafood Way, which is on our west, is really important to preserve as a truck street, to support the businesses that, are adjacent. So to Danielle's point, we worked very hard to not only notch the buildings considerably, which you can see here in this plan, but also to organize our buildings so that that's where a lot of our critical R&D support space is located. These are loading docks, electrical vaults, mechanical rooms, and spaces that won't draw pedestrians. And it's really our goal to keep, pedestrians off of Seafood Way, other than just for kind of safe egress. So that was a driver in how we treated Seafood Way. Also, as Danielle had mentioned, Fid Kennedy Avenue is meant to be, a truck-focused thoroughfare that will support the MMT and other areas in the park. There will be a plan to, kind of improve that at some point. So we work very hard again to orient our building in such a way that work can happen. That street is protected for those types of movements, and nothing that we're proposing kind of interferes with that. It will, facilitate that evolution in the future. So that leaves us with, Northern Avenue and Unnamed Access Road are the streets that we, really focused on the pedestrian experience, and how can we accommodate vehicular movements, but also bicycle movements and pedestrian arrival to the building and connection through the park. So you can see Northern Avenue to the lower part of the page. Spent a lot of time coordinating with the improvements that the city currently has underway, and then thinking about on our side of the site, what can we do to set back, provide a considerable amount of public realm. We're showing kind of a pocket plaza in the lower southeast corner, There's a resiliency factor, which we'll kind of get into in a few slides, but that, has pushed us to elevate the site. So there's kind of a protected, elevated realm and porch type condition that happens along that edge. So a lot of setback, a lot of public realm opportunities, and we think a welcoming, experience for the building, but also further away from the street. So, a safe and pleasant pedestrian environment. You can see the non-destination retail favors Northern Avenue. We felt like that was the right place for it. And then unnamed access road is also, kind of an important street for us in terms of creating the arrival or celebrating the arrival to 5 Fit Kennedy, which is the building page north that, that fronts, that abuts Fit Kennedy Avenue, but actually fronts a courtyard that we've created between these buildings. We worked hard to keep the entry off of that courtyard, again, to kind of, drive pedestrian traffic along unnamed access road, but not present, that pedestrian experience too far on Fit Kennedy Avenue. And then to really curate a wonderful experience that we think will be a benefit to the whole park in the center of the site. Danielle had mentioned, a place where people can, not just from our buildings, but, really everywhere in the park can go and enjoy a break, can enjoy some nature. It's a protected environment away from the truck traffic. And really, we think this is going to be a wonderful amenity for the whole park. Lastly, just kind of highlighting again our pedestrian, circulation routes. We've worked hard to organize the site to allow some of that cross movement between our site and the Innovation Square site to the east of us. So there's some, internal, pedestrian paths that sit kind of in the center of the block, again, kind of protected from the edges. And then, pulling the building back and really kind of providing us a generous sidewalk along unnamed access road between our courtyard and Northern Avenue allows for that pedestrian movement to extend to the south to ultimately connect up to Dry Dock Avenue through a proposed connector that will happen across the street. So we're, again, different conditions on each side of the site. We've worked very hard to be responsive to, how we treated each edge condition, really to benefit the park and to benefit the project. So just kind of highlighting on the next slide here. Here we go. Just highlighting, again, where people are entering and really just, wanting to identify access. So starting on Northern Avenue, the 310 Northern building has its main front door at Northern Avenue in the center of the block. Again, it's set back, a healthy dimension to, accommodate a lot of those pedestrian movements. We do anticipate some, openings along that edge for the non-destination retail and some connection to that front porch environment. Our loading for the 310 Northern building happens on both sides of the building towards Seafood Way, and then a smaller portion towards unnamed access road. That's really important for the way that the building needs to operate, but it's mitigated towards unnamed access road and kind of tied into the truck environment along Seafood Way. And then our loading for 5 Fit Kennedy is also located on Seafood Way, kind of internal to one of those notches. Our front door for 5 Fit Kennedy is off of the courtyard, as mentioned, and then there's also another access point to 310 Northern. And then 2 other things to note: there will be subgrade parking as part of this project. There's an entry, if you can see my cursor, kind of off of Seafood Way, favoring Northern Avenue, and then off of unnamed access road, favoring 5 Fit Kennedy Avenue. There'll also be important bike entries. We kind of have this exciting idea about these wonderful bike lobbies that take you to these great rooms that live within the building. And that will connect off of unnamed access road. And that kind of ties into where we're trying to place that pedestrian and bicycle emphasis. So just to give you a sense of where people are moving, where vehicles are moving, and kind of where some of that energy is oriented. This will give you a sense of that Northern Avenue experience. We're really excited about this. Again, there's a considerable dimension, between the building and the sidewalk to really allow for public realm that will support the experience for the entire park. There's lots of seating opportunities, planters. There's kind of a sloped environment that gets you up towards that elevated plaza moment to support the resiliency datum that we're dealing with the site. A lot of the planting supports are kind of stormwater management strategies as it relates to bioretention planters and some other kind of softscape moments. So all in all, we're very excited. We think this will be very welcoming, and this is the right moment to have this type of public realm along Northern Avenue. And then again, kind of trying to highlight the courtyard that we're very excited about, between the buildings. This is meant to be that mid-block respite. It's a generous space. It's, will be programmed so that it can be very welcoming for people. You can see an image in the lower left corner, that will have a soft kind of green, feeling to it, in this park that has a lot of hard edges. So again, you can see a lot of opportunities for planting. We're using native plantings, salt resistant, types of plantings, and all of that really helps us reduce the heat island effect, which is very important. It also just softens up what Danielle had shared as a fully paved site. So, we're doing, I think, a lot of good in terms of, how we're reducing that heat island effect. We're also providing green infrastructure along the edges. You can see a little bit of that in these images as it relates to the sidewalk. So that kind of slows down and filters the stormwater, and that's part of our strategy there. And then, as we mentioned, and you'll see a little bit more in the section, the entire, the entire site where the buildings sit are raised just over 3 feet to meet the design flood elevation, the 2070 datum. To support our resiliency, we have kind of a larger strategy around that, but that does give us some nice moments to again bring people up, build some of this planting, and again kind of give people a little bit more of a sheltered experience away from the site's edges. So the building, the buildings themselves, we're excited about this in a lot of ways. One is that, these buildings are in the Marine Park. It's a really unique and special, place within the city. It's important for us that the buildings had somewhat of an industrial aesthetic, or an aesthetic that represented a modern, mixed industrial building, but also kind of hearkened to, the history and the fabric of the neighborhood. So we feel like the expression of these buildings, really represents the unique neighborhood that we're designing in. So you can see an image of that here. As it relates to performance, that's another area that we've been working really hard on and are really excited by, from an energy standpoint. I think just to kind of highlight some of those strategies, we've spent a lot of time thinking about the lab building. There's a lot of things on the roof, but how can we, integrate some photovoltaic panels? We have a strategy to work that in vertically on our screen walls and our penthouse walls, where we have those, the right orientation. Those loads will offset the building's common areas, and that was kind of an important target for us that we coordinated with the city on. We're also, very focused on the envelope. The energy code is changing. It's very important for us to provide a responsible, envelope that keeps, the building tight, so it reduces the load on the mechanical system. So very low window to wall ratio at about 35%. Very high performance glazing and insulated, panels where we don't have glazing. You can see some of the metrics here. A U value of 0.159 for the vertical envelope assemblies, not counting on the roof, which is the right way to do it per the new code. And also, meeting the air infiltration requirements of 0.25 CFM per square foot, as kind of coordinated with, with the city. So we're really pushing it on the envelope side, and feel very good about that strategy. As it relates to some of the equipment that we're providing within the building, we're employing air source heat pumps, heat recovery chillers, and all of that really reduces the building's fossil fuel usage by over 96%. So again, another great metric, and one that we're proud of. And then just kind of what we had talked about on the site, as it relates to reducing the heat island effect, a lot of planting, a lot of soft surfaces, a lot of pervious, moments on the site. And then obviously resiliency, which is, something that we've been mindful of, not only in terms of raising the buildings, which we are by just over 3 feet, raising the infrastructure by another foot above that, the critical infrastructure at the ground level, and then moving some of that up to the roof. But also kind of taking moments where, where we do think there could be, that could be susceptible to a weather event, and kind of working further to provide flood barriers where, at our parking entries, at our loading areas, wherever there's a moment where we need to be below that flood elevation, and then also thinking through strategies on how to wet-proof our parking structure below or those loading dock areas. So as a third line of defense, raising the building, localized flood barriers, and then also a wet proofing strategy for the garage in terms of drainage and materials and resilient materials that, if water did get in there, there would be a way to address that so that it's not, debilitating to the building. So, again, just really thinking about the building design from an energy standpoint, equipment, facade, site strategy, and resiliency. And that applies to both buildings. This is a view of the 5 Fid Kennedy building from Fid Kennedy Avenue. You can see it's a little bit of a different expression, one that we think works really well with the 310 Northern building and works well with the surrounding site. But all of the metrics that I just talked about apply to both buildings, and they both perform, very well as it relates to energy. So just to give you a sense of how the building stacks. So what you see on the left is the 310 Northern building. That's a 7-story building with non-destination retail at the base, loading and critical R&D support spaces, and then really 6 levels of that, R&D use above, and then mechanical space above that. Now you'll see that there's always kind of some constraints in this part of the city. As it relates to where we place the first floor, again, we're up 3 feet over the site's kind of current grade. And then we're also, bound at the top by the FAA, surface and that datum that, is critical to keep all equipment and all, kind of physical elements of the building below. So we're looking at a height of about 138 feet for the 310 Northern building. And again, those are kind of our 2, datums that we're working within. And then you can see to the right is 5 Fid Kennedy Avenue. That's a 6-story building, same program arrangement, loading and critical support spaces at the ground level, although on the far side of the building, and then, R&D space with mechanical space at the top. But that's a little bit lower at 133 feet because of where it sits in relationship to that FAA glide path. And now I will turn it over to Heather Walters from Thornton Tomasetti, who's been kind of leading the charge for us on the sustainability front.
Sure. Thanks so much, John. So these buildings are going to be extremely sustainable. They're both targeting LEED Gold. They meet the low carbon design requirements in the city of Boston's net zero carbon targets. As John mentioned, we're integrating some level of renewable energy on the screen walls at the top of the buildings. These buildings are going to be largely electrified, and we're looking at a 42% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions from the current stretch code. These analysis will need to be redone with the new code in the future, but currently it's a 42% reduction from the current code, and a 96% reduction in fossil fuel, which we're really, really excited about. John mentioned the resiliency items. In addition to what he mentioned, salt-tolerant landscaping, and we're funding the BPDA's climate resilience infrastructure for $250,000 annually. Heat Island also has been a really significant driver for the site and landscape design, and we think will bring a nice little oasis to the current asphalt site area. And then, so if you go to the next slide, John, this is what we're really excited about on this project. We did a study for the city on the electrification. So the question was, we're 94% fossil fuel free. What would it take to get to 100% fossil fuel free? So the issue in our area and in Boston generally, right, is that those last few days of the winter are really the kickers for heating capacity. In order to get from 94% fossil fuel free to 100% fossil fuel free from a heating standpoint, we need to increase the size of our system from 52 heat pumps to 200. And 67 heat pumps. So the question for us was, does that pay itself back in the embodied carbon of the heat pumps? So that's the energy and greenhouse gas emissions required to manufacture the heat pumps themselves. Understanding that heat pumps have only about a 20-year lifespan, it would take 24 years to pay back that difference in embodied carbon through the operational savings. So the annual operational savings are really small in that 6% greenhouse gas, but that initial jump is over 3 times. So we presented this study to the city and they were pretty excited. And this type of study is going to help us continue to right size the project's heat pump capacity and figure out what the most appropriate options are, obviously understanding that we'll need to be compliant with the new code, which is kicking in July, excitingly enough. So.
And Heather, just to clarify, so this slide says 94% fossil fuel free, but we're 96, right?
I apologize. Yes, we're 96.
No, that's fine. I just want to make sure because I'm not being nitpicky, but I just don't want to avoid confusion there.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Okay. All right, so the master plan update, and just I'm noticing a couple of questions in the chat. Alice, are we going to address those at the end?
Yeah, if there's some that you think are relevant to specific things, yes, you can talk about them now, or we can come back to all of them at the end.
All right, great. So if you can go to the next slide, John, thank you. So, this project, like I had mentioned before, we've been working closely with the city. We've been closely working with the MEPA office, Department of Energy Resources. We're starting to collaborate with Mass DEP. We are entirely consistent with what's prescribed in the master plan update. We are supporting the Chapter 91 regulation that requires 2/3 of the land area in this marine park be used for water dependent uses. I think my comment earlier about how if you look at table 7, we are not required to, have public accommodations on the site or marine industrial use on the site. That did not mean we are not subject to Chapter 91. I just want to be very clear. We are very subject to Chapter 91. We are going to go through a project specific Chapter 91 public process. We are, the one thing about this project that we've gotten compliments or at least feedback on through our public process is people appreciate that we've located or proposing to locate life science here in an industrial park rather than in other parts of the city closer to residential. That is a comment we've received quite a bit here. We're making significant investments in improving infrastructure in the park. We are committed to spending a significant amount of money towards transportation improvements in the park. In fact, we've already started those payments to the city. Massport will have access to some of those as well because they're making some improvements to the Hall Road rotary there in front of the tent off to the left in this aerial. As Heather mentioned, we are contributing to the city's recently formed Climate Resiliency Fund. So for those of you who don't know, that's a fund that's using private sector money to plan for impacts to sea level rise. So we are contributing to that. So in general, we are fully aligned with the master plan update. We are, providing a significant investment in a new modern seafood facility. That facility, believe it or not, 35,000 square foot facility in today's market is trending about $31 to $32 million. If you asked me a couple of years ago if that's how much it would cost to build one of these facilities, I would have not thunk that at all. Providing a new modern facility for relocating seafood companies. John, can we go to the next series of slides? So we have about 3 slides here that are kind of touching upon the project benefits, a lot of which we've already talked about here, right? So we're supporting water dependent uses. both with the relocation facility, but I think we also have done, I think, a good job of making sure that Nagel is protected and their successful business there, and making sure that we don't do anything with our site planning to adversely impact them. Harpoon's not marine industrial use, but we support them as well. We are fueling job creation, not only with our site, but helping the seafood industry in the new relocation facility. And at our site, it's not just scientists, it's not just researchers, right? We're talking about people that are going to come to work, that are going to work in building operations, they're going to work in security, there's janitorial staff, there's administrative staff, there's truck drivers that are going to make critical deliveries. So there's a lot of opportunity here for job creation. We are making significant contributions in linkage payments, as I think you all know, towards affordable housing and workforce training programs. One thing to point out is that we are going to leverage our development platform to create opportunities for underrepresented groups. So, first off, our architect and contractor are committed to partnering with a minority or woman-owned business, but it goes beyond them, right? We are working with a whole host of engineers. We're going to finance the project. We're working with a legal team. So everyone that we touch on this project, it's trying to promote opportunities for others. We have created a corporate partnership with BioBus, which is a nonprofit focused on exposing students from underrepresented groups to STEM education and career opportunities. And we plan to expand on that partnership as part of this project. We also have partnered with CREST, which is an internship program designed to introduce underrepresented groups to the commercial real estate industry. So we've been doing that for the past several years. So we're really excited about those opportunities. John, let's go to the next slide, if you don't mind. From a transportation standpoint, just worth noting, our traffic analysis and travel mode shares for this project are completely aligned with the master plan update. Our parking supply that we're proposing is well below the maximum city guidelines. And so when you take all that and you combine it with our menu of travel demand management elements, some of which are listed here on the slide, we're hoping they're going to work together to make sure that we're minimizing vehicle travel to and from the site. And we're hopeful that as more improvements to alternative transportation modes in the neighborhood, right, like Silver Line upgrades, or there's ferry service, and then there's pilot programs to expand upon that ferry service. We're hopeful that reliance on the vehicle will diminish over time. We've been, if you don't mind continuing to the next slide, as I think Heather did a good job demonstrating what we're doing from a sustainability standpoint. We've been working closely with John Dalzell at the BPDA. We've worked with the Department of Energy Resources. We are, meeting the city's zero net carbon zoning. We're trying to be thoughtful in terms of resiliency. In general, we're excited about this opportunity, but what we wanted to communicate to you all is that there are a lot of challenges here, right? We're mixing industrial uses. We need to think about, how that impacts our neighbors. We need to be thoughtful about accommodating trucks. We need to be thoughtful about providing safe passage for people and bikes. We want to provide, amenities to not only the tenants of our building, but, the overall park and the public, with our, central courtyard and our pocket park on Northern Avenue, and, our non-destination retail. And I think someone in the chat asked if we have public restrooms. We do not have a public restroom. Now, like I said, we have not designed or created our retail strategy yet. I suspect whatever we end up with there will have a public restroom component. But if you can imagine, we are catering to life science companies who, and you may have heard this before, they're very particular and very concerned around security. And so having public meander through their building and creating opportunities for people to piggyback and get into secure lab spaces is something that they take very seriously. So we do not have, other than that retail space on the ground floor, we do not have a public restroom or a public space in the building itself. We are, challenged by the FAA height. We're challenged by needing to notch our building to accommodate our neighbors. We're challenged by creating a public realm to support the neighborhood. So all these challenges, we can't even get to our maximum FAR on the site, just to like point out, like we're trying to do the right thing. And, you know, we're leaving a fair amount of square footage on the table, and, you know, that translates into lost revenue. But we're really excited about this opportunity. We want to be good neighbors. We want to be a good stakeholder, and hopefully we kind of demonstrated the challenges that we've been up against and how we're kind of working through the solutions. And we're hopeful that, you know, you all, you know, agree, and look forward to hearing your thoughts on our approach. That is it for our formal presentation. I was just trying to skim the chat to see if, but I'll let Alice and Al walk us through the questions.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that presentation. And we're going to have the discussion and Q&A now. Alice, you'll be monitoring the chat, right? And also, if folks want to use the raise hand function, try and use the electronic raise hand function, so we'll see it. And Alice will facilitate all of that and make sure that folks have a chance to have their questions addressed. I'd like to use the awesome power of the chair to ask the first question, and it's to ask you guys to elaborate on something, Danielle, that you talked about right near the end, which is the mode share and more broadly your philosophy about encouraging ways of getting here other than individuals driving. So it's a short but multi-part question. The first of which is, can you remind us how many parking spaces you're actually providing?
Yeah, so our ratio is 0.55 spaces per 1,000 square feet, which translates into, I think, about 408 parking spaces. But in full disclosure, we understand that the city is trying to get to their, you know, carbon targets by like 2050, I think. So we are working with the Air Pollution Control Commission and the city of Boston to kind of ramp that down over time. So as upgrades occur to alternative transportation in the neighborhood, the reliance on the vehicle will be less, right? That's our hope. And so, like, over time, you know, the goal is to go from 0.55 to like 0.425. So it's like a trending scale so that we're committed to reducing reliance on the automobile.
Okay, thank you. And you know, and my 0.55 is a pretty good place to start. So let me just ask about the two alternatives that I think most people are familiar with, and you mentioned them both. The Silver Line, both this project and your project on Dry Dock are you know, close to the Silver Line stops in the eastern end of the park, and the other is the potential for ferry service to the eastern end of the park. Can you just talk about your outlook on those? You know, anything you're doing in that regard, and any thoughts you have about the pedestrian route from those respective modes to your buildings? Yeah,
so a couple of things. One is, so from a 310 Northern perspective, we don't have our, call it, transportation mitigation strategy worked out yet with the city. What we do know is we are committed to spending millions of dollars on improvements in the neighborhood as it relates to transit improvements. You know, I will say right now with the Foundry at Dry Dock project that we have going down the street, you know, they are committed to providing a shuttle from the Marine Park to North and South stations to supplement existing transportation options in the neighborhood. You know, the route for that shuttle and the operating hours haven't been set yet. That will be a collaborative process with the city and probably the Marine Park. But that is something that we're committed to, and I imagine there'll be something similar, right, for 310 Northern. We'll have to work that through with the city and really the stakeholders in and around the park. I think that's going to be a collaborative effort for sure. As far as you know, pedestrian walkways, I think, John, if you can go to that site plan, maybe I think we're doing within the limits of our scope, we're doing the best we can to make improvements. And we're hopeful that the city and other developers in this area will continue with this strategy, which is let's widen the sidewalks, right? Let's create a buffer for people. And they're not just like hardscape walkways. There's going to be, integrated benching and planting. So the idea is that it's an enjoyable, safe experience as you meander through the park. And I think over time, hopefully other developers and other stakeholders will embrace this, right? I mean, I think right now it's all about embracing change, and it's not easy, right? We've got companies that have been out there working out there for a long time, and now we're starting to talk about introducing more pedestrians and bikes and, and even like people coming from the cruise terminal, right? Making sure that people have safe passage as they maybe meander deeper into West Seaport. So I don't have a specific answer on that. All I can say is we are committed to working collaboratively with others to identify solutions beyond the solutions we've identified to date.
Good. Thank you very much. Alice, who's up?
Yeah, we've got lots of questions. The first one was from Steve Hollinger, who also has his hand up. So Steve, why don't you ask your question?
Okay, thank you, Alice. First of all, I didn't attend a lot of almost all of the city process. So to that degree, I realize my comments are a little late in the game. But from what I'm seeing, first of all, with regard to capture of stormwater, you're capturing the same level of stormwater a building 20 years ago would have captured, not stormwater that we would expect 70, 100 years from now, 50 years from now. And that is not directly your problem, but I would like to point that out. Also, with regard to the Stormwater Resiliency Fund, when is the first year you'll be contributing to that? And I have a follow-up on that.
Yeah, if you're familiar with how that fund works, I'm not sure when we contribute because it's all driven by when the city actually implements their improvements.
Okay, because my understanding is that no one has to contribute to that fund until 50% of property owners are in the fund, and that might be 50 years from now. So that $250,000, which is a small amount relative to a building that's 742,000 square feet of upzoning on prime waterfront real estate, a very, very valuable bit of upzoning. We're seeing kind of what I would say breadcrumbs in terms of contribution to the externalized cost of mitigating stormwater, all the costs are dealing with in the seaport with bolstering against sea level rise and storm surge. Just want that comment out there. And
yeah, I would, I'm going to respond to that actually. Okay. So I can see your perspective, and yes, there is a timing issue that we do not control. But I will say that's not the only thing we're doing from financial contributions for this project, right? The ground rent from this project is going to be significantly higher. We're talking about, billions of dollars.
Yeah.
So real estate taxes, ground rent, there's also other operation fees that we're going to be contributing to. So there are many opportunities for financial contributions that this project alone is going to contribute. So I just want to be clear when you say breadcrumbs, I feel like we're doing a little bit more than that.
Okay, well, I'm specifically talking about climate mitigation contributions. And it's like I said, it's not going to be just specific to $250,000, right? The city's going to have opportunities with that money to place the money where they see fit in terms of protecting the park, and we're doing the best we can within the limits of our site. Thank you. My last comment would be that, and there is a lot to like about this project. I see that, but first of all, within Chapter 91, I don't see how it meets Chapter 91, but we don't have to get into that right now. But I do think it has kind of a fortress feel in terms of pedestrians walking around an entire privatized edge condition, the whole building except for where the retail is. And I understand your constraints in terms of not having foot traffic to support retail at those edges, but I just want to point that out. Thanks again for having us today.
Thanks, Steve. Vivian, you've got a few questions in the chat. I'll let you ask a couple because you've got your hand up, and then we'll come back to anything that you haven't gotten to.
I think Steve hit on a number of concerns as well. But can you talk a little bit about the parking spaces? It seems like a lot of parking. I mean, we're talking, about, you talk about on the one hand, evolving into the 21st century. And yet, you're talking about more than 400 parking spaces, which in this day and age is a lot of parking in an area, and at a time when, Alice is pushing for water transportation, where, we're talking about increased bike lanes, we're talking about improvements to Silver Line. I mean, you're nearly across the street from a Silver Line stop coming into the Marine Industrial Park. So I think it's a lot of parking.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we know that there are a lot of choke points on the Silver Line today, right? There's a lot of inefficiencies in it. Our parking ratio is significantly below parking ratios of our competition in the city and other cities, below what the city, the maximum limits here. We are anticipating, potentially 3,400 jobs here. So as you can imagine, like that 400 isn't accommodating everyone that's going to come and work in this building.
Well, I'm not going to argue with you on that. I will tell you that you look at the courthouse, the Mopley Courthouse, for example, only 60 parking spaces. I don't know how many thousands of people work in the Mopley Courthouse. There's 60 parking spaces there, and they're reserved for the judges. So when you're developing in the Seaport and the Marine Industrial Park, it's not about how many spaces. Plus, you've got the city's parking lot across the street, parking garage. But we won't, I'll make that point.
I appreciate your perspective. I'm just, I think that the courthouse might be different, right? We're talking about the courthouse with adjacency to South Station versus East Seaport, where like the alternative modes of transportation, have some deficiencies in the system that are, people are obviously looking at to fix. And what we're saying is like, look, if we want to attract the life science industry, because this is like one of the largest ecosystems in the country, people need to be able to get to work. And we're trying to balance the needs of that with, the fact that the Silver Line does not work perfectly. So we're Vivian, I totally appreciate your perspective. I just ask that you also understand our perspective, that we are trying to, again, balance the near-term needs versus long-term goals.
Well, you're talking to Boston Harbor right now, and they have worked very hard on alternative uses, but I'm not even going to debate that right now. I've made the point. Okay. In terms of the non-destination and retail uses, there's space there, and there's obviously the opportunity to have public restrooms there as well. That will be available to the public regardless of patronage. And if you look at other buildings throughout the city that have been subject to Chapter 91, it's pretty clear that they can make it work. Every building we hear about, there's concerns about security, whether it's in a building like yours or like at Vertex, or whether it's in, upscale office buildings like the law firms in the Seaport, but they've been able to figure it out. And there are ways to deal with security that you all well know, through the elevator, through your security guard and whatever. So that if there's a non-destination retail usage, again, I would suggest you look at the federal courthouse on the side facing the water, where you have the restroom for the restaurant outside of the restaurant. And it can be used both by the restaurant patrons, but also by patrons of, that are using the Harbor Walk and the public realm areas that you're suggesting. And then finally, on the resiliency fund, I think it'll be good to also think about ways to support what's happening in the region, because it's, regardless of the 250,000, that is, if you look at other tenants, a very modest amount of money to contribute on an annual basis for the resiliency projects that, again, Boston Harbor Now, other groups are talking about, and the city's talking about for our shoreline. So it's, while you may think it's a lot of money, and obviously anyone at this point developing new projects, there are significant linkage and other requirements. It's a given in Boston. It is not cheap to develop in Boston. If you want to find cheap, go to Ohio, go someplace else. But, you know, I think most of the property owners and developers will tell you that Boston is a very expensive city to build on. And when you're talking about close to the waterfront, you know, the requirements are very stringent, more stringent than just most places in the country, just because I've done other work in other parts of the country. So it's a given, you know, and yet we don't stop building, you know, biotech and other facilities because there's an interest in this and there. We have the brain power. You know, there is the MIT, there is all of that, you know, the hospitals and such. So unlike other cities that you may have done work in, I mean, we have not only the beautiful areas, as you have pointed out in the Marine Industrial Park, but also we have the brain power, which is why Boston/Cambridge is so attractive to the uses that you're talking about. And it will continue to be. And we saw it certainly during COVID, and it will continue to be again. I mean, we are the center of much of, you know, the types of technology that you're talking about. So we're thrilled that you're coming, obviously, but, you know, you are in the Ray Flynn Marine Park with, you know, Seafood Way and all those other things that we've mentioned. And this is a marine industrial park, no question about it. And so some of the questions that we're asking are to be sure that those marine industrial uses continue, and that while we have expanded the definition of industrial uses, that we understand that there are also jobs that are created for people, frankly, with perhaps less education, but more training, who work in the seafood industry. And so we're very concerned about that as well. So thank you very much for coming to present. And we look forward, as you go through the rest of the permitting, to have some of these other issues addressed as well. Thank you.
Vivian, you also asked about the building scale. Do you feel like that question got answered, or did you have another question
Well,
about the size of the building?
You answered for them. I don't know if you, Alice, you were representing them, or when I looked at the drawing of when you showed one of the maps of the two buildings.
It was one of the earliest diagrams.
And then, okay,
This
that one is my question at the time was, is that drawn to scale? Because the relocation facility looks a bit smaller than the two new buildings being
Oh,
built.
the relocation facility is much smaller than the relocation facility is only about 35,000 square feet.
Okay.
And the new buildings are 742,000 square feet. So yes, they are to scale. And the relocation facility is significantly smaller.
So is it, I guess my question was, when I look at the drawing, was it to scale? Did it reflect how much smaller? I guess I couldn't tell, and that's why I asked the question, but you just.
Yeah, I mean, John, I'm not an architect. Maybe you can address Vivian's question from an architectural perspective.
No, it's a good question. It is to scale. You know, on the map here, the relocation facility is a lower building, so I think most of that 35,000 square feet is in its first floor. You know, as it relates to a single story building, whereas, you know, if you look at our site coverage, we're probably 120,000 square feet thereabouts, you know, going up 6 and 7 stories. So I think it gives a good relationship, but the buildings are much different in terms of their height and density.
Thank you.
Thanks, Vivian. Bud, you've got your hand up, and then we'll go to more chat questions.
Sure. Just a couple of things. One, I really appreciate the challenge of this site. I loved your diagram of getting squashed from above by Logan flight path and risen from the bottom by sea level rise. And then, of course, you got the truck traffic on the other side. So one small question, maybe it's not so small, is it looks to me like you've done a pretty good job of really trying to separate the pedestrian and bike areas from all that truck traffic. And we're always worried about it in reviewing these projects. From a perspective that you might not often hear, is that we don't want to, you know, 20 years from now, people start complaining about the trucks, and then before you know it, important uses in the marine industrial area are, you know, forced to move. So I think you've accommodated that. I wish you could move the two loading docks for your own building away from unnamed access road. Maybe you can explain why they're there. I'm imagining there's a core of the building that would be hard to run those through if we're on the other side. But and then my bigger question is, I'm really excited to see what you're doing on reducing carbon emissions. And I think we've gone through a period in the last 5 years where everybody thought lab space would be the hardest to do to now seeing 3 or 4 projects come through that there's a really good attempt to do what the city's trying to achieve. And I'd just be interested more philosophically, what's happened that made it easier than it was 5 years ago, knowing that lab buildings are often very energy intensive.
Okay, I'll take the first one, and Heather, maybe you could take the second part.
Yeah.
And John, jump in here but I think, but you're right. I mean, when we looked at the site plan, we were trying to, like, internally, and John will tell you, like, I was trying to push for no loading off of unnamed access road to enhance that public experience.
Mhm.
Couple reasons. One is we've got limitations in terms of the core, right? And getting deliveries from one end of the building to the other. But the other thing too is, everyone on this call, including us, right, are concerned about resiliency. But these lab tenants that are going to be interested in this building are also concerned with it, and also a level of redundancy, right? And so what we hear from a lot of these life science companies is they like the redundant critical R&D support space in the form of loading areas, in the form of chemical storage areas. And so we have it on here. But through our leasing strategy, we find that there's an opportunity not to have it. We get it. It's something that has come up during our process with the city. And we are committed to continue to explore it. But right now it's there because we think we need it. And, Innovation Square across this unnamed access road has their loading there too. So we were feeling like, even though it's not ideal, there's already some loading happening in that area. And so just incorporating interventions to make sure that the mix of uses there can coexist safely. Heather, do you mind taking the second question?
Yeah, so the last 5 years have been super exciting, right? From a technology and an ability for these buildings, for these high ventilation, energy use buildings to meet more aggressive energy codes. I think the reason that's happened is there's a couple pieces. Number one, there's an understanding that we have to do it, right? So we're going to use the most high-tech and sophisticated systems available because we need to. That gets us a little way there. A much bigger piece with some of the technology has just jumped really far ahead in the past 5 years. Heat pumps are better. We have, energy recovery ventilators that we can actually use in lab buildings. That's huge. And then I think a third piece that's maybe a little bit under represented is that some of the way we're getting to some of these better energy pieces is by the expectations of the tenants have changed a little bit, and they're okay with us giving them lower ventilation rates in some of these spaces. So the old standby of everyone needs 6 air changes per hour for every square foot of the building because they want to put a lab anywhere or everywhere, and that's where these buildings were. That's changed on the tenant side too, and they're okay with the good high-end, R&D tenants that, like we mentioned, were coming because of everything Boston has to offer, are also willing to say, okay, we'll be more strategic in our ventilation needs and we'll work with you on that. So we're able to right-size the building systems for the actual needs of the tenants and not just, a future dream that's never going to happen. So I think a combination of those three things have pushed this significantly. And I think we'll continue to see improvement. I think it's going to be more incremental at this point, personally. I'm not sure we're going to see the same jump for the next 5 years that we've seen in the past 5 years. But that incremental progress, I think, is going to continue.
I mean, and ultimately, you've got that 5% left. You can get renewables offsite or, do other kinds of offsets. And I'm wondering if maybe the various developers in the Seaport ought to get together and figure out a way, a sort of aggregated strategy to achieve that. Maybe that'll happen over time.
Yeah, I think there is a lot of thought and talk for several of the tenants. in the seaport to, you know, to find a way to get to zero. So yeah, the future is exciting.
Thank you.
Thank you. I've got a bunch of questions in the chat. But I want to jump, well, I'm going to start at the top. Tom Reedy has left us, but he had two questions that I want to get to. The first one I think you've sort of begun to address. One of them was he asked if the unnamed access road, does it need to support vehicles? Why not make it pedestrian only plaza with emergency access? And I think we've talked about, you know, that's where cars are turning into the garage, et cetera. And there's also need for the site to your east that is also doing that. So just checking that that's all correct.
Yeah, I think too, like when we were talking to Harpoon and Nagel, like they obviously want to preserve Seafood Way for trucks, right? So they want Seafood Way for trucks and other people want unnamed access road just for pedestrians. And this goes to the point of there's a lot of competing interests and we're just trying to do our best to satisfy them all. And unfortunately, I don't think we're going to get 100% by everyone. But we're trying to make interventions to make our situation the best it possibly can be in terms of these different uses coexisting. So I think unnamed access road, and it's, you know, this is not even my call, this would be like the city and others, but I think that's a critical vehicular route that really couldn't be eliminated entirely.
All right. And then the second question Tom had, he says he's going to watch the recording, so we're going to get it all in here.
Okay.
Regarding resiliency, the city doesn't currently define UPS systems and fuel as critical infrastructure. Are the building UPS systems and fuel tanks above the 21.5 foot elevation?
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, they are. We're trying to be mindful of that. We're balancing a lot of concerns at that lower level, but that's our target for sure.
Great, thanks. And then a very particular question, but I think you guys had a square footage for all of your public space. How big is the central courtyard area, like just that space?
John, what did we say? It was like around 30? 30,
Yeah, I was going to say
35,000.
roughly it's probably close to 30. And then again, a lot of the other public realm comes with the kind of generous pocket plaza that we have along Northern Avenue.
Great, thanks for clarifying. There were a couple of questions, both publicly in the chat and to me, just to clarify. The critical infrastructure resilience fund that you would eventually pay an annual payment into is for the Flynn Marine Park specifically? And is that for parcels that are on BPDA owned land, or does that include non-BPDA owned land, or is it all BPDA owned land and that's why this is possible?
I don't know of another, and I could be wrong here, but I think the BPDA owns all the land and it's ground leased to various, like even the Massport Marine Terminal. I mean, the city of Boston's the landowner, right? Massport subleases it from them, or leases it from them, excuse me. So my understanding is that when we, you know, our project and other projects contribute to this fund, that it's for climate resiliency measures addressing the entire park. Yeah,
that is my understanding too, but I just, for the record, wanted to make sure that was all clear on the recording. And if folks have other questions.
Obviously, climate resilience, you know, I appreciate the feedback on this call, and we will, you know, knowing that we're going through a Chapter 91 process here shortly, we'll make sure we're a little bit more prepared to talk through that and address some of people's concerns. You know, I think it was Steve used the word argue. Like, I don't want to argue, like this should be a collaborative process. And I think we've done a good job so far collaborating with people on these various issues. But I did write down Vivian and Steve's concerns about resilience, and we'll make our narrative stronger there as we approach Chapter 91.
Great. It's like handling the side chat on the property ownership. Great. I guess the there have also been a lot of questions publicly, and there's conversation about transportation. And I know that Marcus Partners is developing another site that you mentioned might be getting a shuttle. One of the big pushes in the central, or I guess western, we'll call part of the seaport, is the issue of everyone started their own shuttle, and the city said, whoa, 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 this is too many shuttles. And so the Convention Center Authority consolidated those shuttles first into a single shuttle, and then now they primarily serve that district with water transportation services. Would a similar ferry, if I believe Pat Sullivan might be here to talk about that as well, if that ferry came to the dry dock, at the end of dry dock by the concrete silos, is that something that Marcus Partners would see paying into and using that as their shuttle, or is there a desire to have a different shuttle?
I think that, so the shuttle that I was referring to that Foundry's doing is an actual vehicular shuttle, right? Shuttling people from the park. As I mentioned, we are committed to contributing to traffic mitigation in the neighborhood so that people have good, safe, efficient means of transit to and from the park. I don't know what that looks like yet, and I think it's going to be a collaborative effort. The master plan update identifies a transportation management committee, and I might be using the phrase incorrectly. I can't remember if Patrick Sullivan is on that or not, but many people are that we're working with, and we're going to have to work with all of them to figure out what the appropriate strategy is for our site. But I think we're open to solutions. I can't sit here today and say that I know exactly what they are, but we're committed to working through them.
Yeah, I think the more people are coming by ferry and walking from the eastern end, the fewer people are not only driving, but also are anywhere near the truck traffic coming in for Seaway. So
I mean, personally, I'm a huge proponent of ferries. When I used to live on the South Shore, I used to take the ferry from Hingham. A lot of my colleagues take it. I don't live anywhere near a ferry now, so I don't, but I love that idea.
Yeah. For those of you who aren't aware of the Seaport Ferry, it is operating today from Van Pier to East Boston and to Lovejoy Wharf next to North Station. So this is my plug for that ferry service. And the plan, I believe, is to go from Lovejoy to Van Pier and then around there. So it would be a pretty fast way to get, relatively speaking, from this part of the district to North Station. And the best thing about ferries is that they are consistent in their timing. Just checking one more question in here. There've been lots of questions about the public restroom access and the pass through, and I think you've heard it from a few different folks, but this question of, I'm looking at the diagram you have up right now, getting from Northern Ave to the central courtyard space, a world in which the lobby was able to extend even narrowly entirely through that space, I think would mimic a lot of the best Chapter 91 spaces that we've seen, even if it's just a sliver. And that's like a way that people could, if there were two different tenants in the building, they could get to 5 Fid Kennedy without going around the building. They would have access to public restrooms. You could be in the courtyard. You could have walked sort of through Innovation Square's courtyard to your courtyard and then down. So I think as you guys think about the ground floor space, a sort of sliver of connection could offer a lot of opportunities.
So Alex, this did come up during our Article 80 process and through our coordination with the planners. We get that. Some of the tenants we have been talking about regarding this project specifically, their feedback is we do not want a 3-block connector. But we're working with John Sullivan's group here on some conceptual test fits, and are there opportunities to create turnstiles that are a little bit further back? So to your point, there's some space in the lobby that has an adjacency to a retail space, so people feel like they can spill out in an interior space that ultimately spills out outside. So we're thinking through that again, just trying to juggle the constraints.
And maybe one thing to add that I didn't mention when we were kind of talking through the site plan, but unnamed access road, that edge there, we've actually pulled the building in. So that sidewalk is, 18 to 20-ish feet from from sidewalk to face of building. But that was done intentionally so we could create some seating and some sheltered area under the second floor to make that a much more, pedestrian focused walk. So it doesn't jump off the page here, but I just wanted to say it in terms of some of the thinking we did to make that a nice pedestrian experience.
Great, thanks for clarifying. Bud, you've got your hand up, and then I'm going to turn it back to Al to wrap things up with a final note that Patrick Sullivan is on the Silver Line at the moment, but he's happy to follow up with anyone who has questions about future ferry service to Marine Park. But
yeah, great. I'll be quick. Just, this is we've heard a number of times about the creation of the BPDA Resilience Fund, and I think the last time we talked to Rich about it, it was sort of a concept that was just getting put into place. So this is maybe less relevant to these folks developing this property, but we ought to really figure out a way to bring Rich or somebody in from BPDA to a forum like this at some point to explain how this fund is really going to work. A, how they're going to collect the money, B, when are they going to collect the money, C, how much are they hoping to raise, and most importantly, what are they going to do with it? I presume they're thinking about some kind of perimeter defense here for the whole area, as was called for in the Climate Ready Boston plan. But it'd be really good to know how all that's going to work over time at some point.
Yeah, agreed. And I saw Steve Hollander's additional comment in the chat. So thanks, Steve, for your feedback on that.
I'm going to put in the chat information for folks about the Ray Flynn Marine Park Master Plan update, which does have some information about it. And the city put out an RFP in the fall. They are looking for they have identified consultants who will be studying possible alignment. So I think that will give them a lot more information to work with. And with that, I'll turn it to Al to close.
Thank you very much. So first of all, I want to thank Danielle, John, and Heather for coming and presenting and taking everybody's questions. And I want to thank everybody in the audience who joined us for today's discussion. Remind you that a recording of this forum, first of all, remind you that it was recorded, and a recording of this forum and some of our past forums are available on YouTube. And Alice, I think, is putting the link to that in the chat as I speak. And I want to remind you also that you can learn more about all of Boston Harbor Now's upcoming events and programming at our website, bostonharbornow.org, by signing up for our monthly email updates, which you can do on the website, or by following us on social media. And with that, I want to wish everybody a very nice rest of their Wednesday.